Hi everyone, my name is Brianna, and today I'm going to be talking about electric cars. I'm refuting Al-Badi's speech. His proposition was electric cars have significant advantages over gas-powered vehicles. His claims were electric-powered cars are safer to the environment than gas, electric cars are more convenient than gas-powered cars, and electric cars are safer in accidents. Today, my proposition is electric cars have no significant difference than gas-powered vehicles in the environment, economy, and safety. Today, I'm going to talk about how there are negative benefits to the environment, that they are a financial burden and inconvenience to the people that buy them and others around them, and that they are unsafe. Let's start with my first claim. Electric vehicles contribute negative environmental benefits equivalent to gas-powered vehicles. Al-Fadi said that his claim was that they're safer than the environment than gas-powered vehicles. And he also had a secondary claim that EVs cut down on greenhouse gas emissions and also they reduce air population by 38%. But what I found out that electric vehicles also can gain to acid rain and algae blooms. And even Al-Fadi said before in a National Academy of Sciences, if EVs are charged with dirty substances like coal, they can increase the deaths by 80%. To back up this statement on a research article by the U.S. Energy and Information Administration, more than 67% of the U.S. is fueled by fossil fuels, which is like coal, natural gases, and nuclear stuff, with coal leading the way by 39%, which means the more we charge our EVs, the more we are polluting our air. For the next claim, I would like to state that electric cars are a financial burden and an inconvenience to the consumer and the people around them. Al-Fadi said that the average electric car saves you from $750 to $12,000 on gas, to $1,200 on gas. Even though I couldn't find anything to rebuttal against it, I could find how much electric cars are worth, how much you have to buy for them, and how much they are to keep them up. Via an article on carsdirect.com, it says the average amount to purchase an EV is $28,000, and that's if you want a basic model. So if you want something more, it's quite expensive. And charging it in EV can add up depending where you charge it. To back this up, according to an article on plugincars.com, the ultimate guide to electric car charging net. So titled The Ultimate Guide to Electric Car Charging Networks. It states that big charging companies like Blink, which was purchased by the Car Charging Group in 2013, has multiple public charging stations in 25 states in the U.S., like California, Arizona, Texas, etc. Say the average cost to charge at one of their stations is $6.99 to $9.99 per session, depending on what membership you have. So you have to pay, plus paying $7 to $10 a session, you have to also pay for a membership. Now let's talk about how they're a burden to people around them. Charging stations can take up space for people who do not own EVs. For example, our own school, which has charging stations, and some of them barely even used, which means they're taken away from space and money away from the college. Now let's talk about the consumer, the people who buy these EVs. Al-Fadi said before, plugging your car is like charging your cell phone. It's easy to charge, you can put it anywhere. So let's think about this for a second. How many times have you had your phone and it's always low on power, you're going places and there's no charger, or if you find a charger, it's not compatible with your phone, or it just simply dies on you. Now imagine that being your car. While looking at an article on techrepublic.com titled The Challenges of EV Charging, it states that some problems charging an EV are that the chargings are slow, they need faster charges, getting through the red tape, which means to install a charging station, service providers must go through local governments, utility providers, and business owners if the station is on a private lot, which can take up time. And also location of public charging stations. When SAE set standards in 2009, the government funded many installations of EV charging stations. Unfortunately, many of them were in developed areas that were not necessarily the most optimum. So now that I have talked about now that I have talked to you about financial and inconvenient EVs are, I would like to bring up my final claim that electric cars are unsafe. Al-Fadi said electric cars are safe in accidents, but most plug-in hybrid vehicles and all electric vehicles use lithium-ion batteries, according to the U.S. Department of Energy. Lithium batteries can overheat fast in cars. A study on Technology Review, it states that Dan Dowdy, who manages lithium-ion battery and Sinadia National Laboratories in Albuquerque, Mexico, says that during tests, he's seen violent explosions, the type that could prevently rupture a steel case. If the liquid cooling also fails, a single battery can cause neighboring batteries to overheat, setting off a cascade of small explosions. So even Al-Fadi mentioned that the electric cars have lithium batteries that can carry the risk of overheating. And Tesla are using radio-chilled coolant that their cars can keep them cool. But when I was researching this, I also saw that an article on Tesla on the Auto Center of Safety says that the early data suggests collision caused fires are more frequent in Tesla Model S than conventional cars. So basically electric cars are unsafe when they're in crashes because of the battery they don't disengage, and people who are trying to help them, they can get in shock, and also the people that are in the cars. A report on the Society of Automotive Engineering, also known as the SAE, highlighted risks to first responders to tow operators for potential electric shock for damaged systems for not disengaging during the immediate after a crash by an EV. So in conclusion, as I talked about how EVs are negative to the society, environmental wise, how they are financial burden and inconvenience to the consumer and the people around them, and they are also unsafe in accidents. I believe that electric cars have no greater significance than the gas-powered vehicles. So whatever you have, just be grateful. Thanks.
All right, you ID the main claim and secondary claims pretty effectively. It sounded to me like you had two previews of the material that you're presenting. It's like a double that says, so I'm going to talk about these things, and then you came back and said, and then I got a counterclaim for each of those things. So it's really, you're doubling up on your preview, and I don't think you need to do that. Signpost on the first point was very clear. You've got an explanation about how they are contributing to problems. You're saying they're not really any better than gas-powered cars. The statistical data that you have is, I think it's the same information that the advocate used. It says that they're fueled by fossil fuels. By the way, nuclear power would not fit into that category, so that would be excluded. But the idea is that if electric cars are charged by the same fossil fuel systems that we have, they're going to contribute to pollution substantially. I think that's a good point. I don't know if there's an on-balance piece of information. In other words, whether or not we get any net advantage by using the fossil fuel generated electricity versus the gas-powered point of power sources that you get with the internal combustion engine. There's probably somebody who's made a study of that trade-off, but I don't think either side in this argument presented any data that would give us an on-balance piece of information on that. So I thought that you had a good press on that. It's a good challenge to the argument. The overall weight of the argument, I think, is hard to assess. On the financial burden, I think you bring up a couple of good issues. You mentioned, for instance, the cost of a basic car. One of the things that you might be doing is a comparison between the vehicles and what the cost is. So, for example, you say the most basic electric car is $28,000. Well, what's the most basic gas-powered car cost? It's probably substantially lower than that. So if you were entering at a base level based on what you could afford, you might have to pay double for a vehicle that is an electric car. And now the question is, how soon are you going to recover that extra cost? So if you're buying, I don't know what the two equivalent things would be. Let's say a Ford Fiesta, which is $14,000, and the EV1 or whatever it is that's $28,000. And they're both basically the same kind of car, except one's powered by electricity. Now the question is, how do I recover that $14,000 additional cost that I have? How long is it going to take for me to do that? There are ways to calculate that sort of thing out. The recharging is taking, how much do you have to pay for the recharging, the electricity, all those sorts of things. By the way, as the price of gas goes down, that extends the extra cost of the electric vehicles. So if gas prices remain relatively low compared to the way they were a year or two ago, that means that the electric car is less appealing financially in the long run. So I think there's a little bit more analysis that you could do on that issue. But you had some basic information, like I said, about cost that was good. And the notion, I thought that there was an additional issue that you introduced here, that there are negative costs to others as a consequence of this. For instance, installing charging stations requires businesses or facilities to go through a whole bunch of red tape to be able to do this, because you've got local governments involved, you've got safety organizations, everything has to be, it's not cheap to put these things in, and it's not so much that the equipment is expensive or the technology is complicated, but all of the governmental paperwork that you have to go through is a pain in the tail end, and I thought that was an interesting point that could probably be developed a lot more. I like the analogy that you make when the advocate really talks about it. It's as simple as charging your phone. I mean, that's an immediate invitation to making a comparison that everybody in here, I think, can relate to. How many times has everybody run into that situation where your phone doesn't have the charge and you're all of a sudden struggling to figure out, okay, well, how do I plug in my phone? Well, now imagine you're in your car on the freeway going through that situation. Does that sound like it's something that's going to be desirable to the consumer? I like that visualization. I thought that worked really well. And then on the issue of safety, I thought you had a good piece of information there, nice data that suggests that when there is a crash and there's a chance of fire, it's actually greater with the electric cars because of the way they work. I thought that worked really well on that particular point. I think you need to talk a little bit more about the quality of the advocate's reasoning and evidence and contrast it with your arguments, but you had good counter arguments that you're making on this. I just think there needs to be a little bit more comparison. And it's not going to affect your grade on anything, but it's refutation is the term that you want to use at the beginning. Refutating is not really a word. It's just one of those. I know. Look, I sound like some cranky old English teacher. Oh, you're not saying it properly, but it does affect the way people perceive you sometimes. So you want to be careful about those sorts of things. It's not a big deal. All right. Sure.